we've been waiting for the F1 driver market to really get going this summer, and it has kicked off now with an absolute bombshell. Daniel Ricciardo leaving Red Bull to sign for Renault for 2019. Scott Mitchell and Ed Straw with me, two of Autosport's Formula One correspondents. Ed, this has come as a shock to the outside world. Has it come as a shock to some of those on the inside though as well?
Well, we knew there were discussions between Ricciardo and Red Bull, but everybody, well almost everybody, expected him to re-sign for the Red Bull team, including those at Red Bull. Something's clearly happened, changed to convince Ricciardo that he should move, and then suddenly we've got this complete about face, and suddenly the Renault deal is back on. So yeah, a real shock. I mean, Scott, you spoke to Ricciardo only a few days ago at the Hungary test, and he still seemed to be destined for Red Bull, didn't he?
Yeah, I felt quite a bit of personal frustration this morning when I hear the rumours start to come out and just thinking, but he told me something different. On Tuesday, his stance was very simple. It was, okay, you said you were going into the summer break with a new Red Bull contract, or that was what was intimated. Hasn't happened. Why? And it was just, fine-tuning details. And there wasn't a whisper of this deal last weekend. So I don't think there's anybody outside of Ricciardo's very, very close circle, and maybe even people within his close circle that saw this coming.
Yeah, I mean, we've been told just shortly before we filmed this that even Christian Horner was taken by complete surprise by this. Ricciardo, in his statement on joining Renault, talks about a fresh challenge, and it's understandable. He's been part of the Red Bull stable for a very long time. But is that all we think is going on here? Or, Scott, is this perhaps a vote of no confidence for where Red Bull's heading with Honda next year?
Well, it's interesting that only a few months ago, Ricciardo was saying that he was losing faith that the situation with Renault could continue at Red Bull. That was when Red Bull was deciding what engine to use next year. So something's happened. It is either he doesn't trust Red Bull Honda, or Renault have either waived a massive check or given him some kind of assurance that things will be different next year or in 2020, because it's a 2-year deal. So you would think he's building for the future, but we thought that this was a guy that wasn't building for the future and needed something now. So something doesn't quite tally, and I'm curious to get back into the paddock at Spa and find out what it is.
We've also got to remember that although he was concerned about the Red Bull-Renault partnership, Renault is Renault's works team, obviously, and Red Bull, there are all sorts of problems in the relationship, and even just simple things like to be able to test new fuel, they had to book time on the Viri dynos for Red Bull's fuel supplier, and that was always difficult because Renault were doing their own thing. They diverted resources into building up Enstone. So although it seems that he's exchanging Renault frustrations for Renault frustrations, he's in the place where Renault, if they get their act together engine-wise, should thrive. So it's not 100% like for like. So maybe that played into it, and he's been convinced that things can be a little bit different in the long term.
Now, Renault is clearly a team on the up. You know, the manufacturer, they've owned that Enstone team in the past. They've sold it, they've bought it back, and they've been reinvesting heavily. But this is still a risk for Ricciardo, isn't it, Ed? I mean, he's going to a team that right now is a front runner in what we've been calling Class B. You know, there's a big gap between the top 3 teams, one of which is Red Bull, and Renault, where he's heading now. Can we expect Renault to make up that gap into 2019, or is he going to have to accept that he's making a step backwards to begin with, at least?
It would be astonishing if they made a big step into 2019. They originally set a 5-year timescale, and in fact Bob Bell said in Germany that maybe that 5-year timescale is actually a minimum rather than the time it takes to do it. So maybe they're realising how big it is. They've invested a huge amount, so it is a risk from Ricciardo. Obviously it depends on where he sees the Honda engine will be. I think if he was convinced the Red Bull Honda would be a winning great package and a step forward from where Red Bull are now, surely he wouldn't move. But I think what he sees at Renault is a long-term opportunity to be the undisputed team leader. He hasn't got Max Verstappen there to worry about. Nico Hülkenberg's no mean competitor, but Max Verstappen is a different kettle of fish. But he sees that as a chance to make the team his own, go on the journey with the team. That's the phrase people like to use. But I think he's going to be looking long-term to be the lead driver for a works team that's championship ready a few years down the line. That's what this is about.
Scott, can you see maybe a glide path here where Red Bull falls backwards and Renault goes forwards as a works team and Ricciardo ends up better off?
Well, that would be, I guess that is what Ricciardo's banking on, isn't it? That there will be some kind of position where Renault is making progress and Red Bull can't do that with Honda. I mean, the suggestion from Christian Horner this year was that if Red Bull had Honda engines this year, the results wouldn't have been any different than if it was with Renault. And the theory there is that Honda has more potential than Renault, therefore it will be better in 2019 and then even better in 2020. But Ed's right, the infrastructure that Renault has is very good. It's improving all the time. They're making changes behind the scenes to try and improve efficiency at Enstone with developing the chassis. They're trying to get their house in order at Viri because for some reason they just keep underestimating the scope for development you've got in these engine regulations. And Cyril Abiteboul admitted that. He said that Mercedes to an extent, but mainly the Ferrari, we've seen the step they've made this year. There's huge progress there that can be done, and Renault's just not finding it. So there is a huge effort at Renault to get all of that together. And whatever they've done to Ricciardo to convince him that they're making the steps to do that has obviously been a success. So it will be interesting to see how that plays out, and it has a massive impact on that fight in the next year or two.
Now this move was massively unexpected. Everybody was expecting, including the people at Red Bull, thought Ricciardo was going to sign a new contract there. We were expecting a lot of movement in the driver market, maybe once Ricciardo had signed. Now he's made this switch that will come as a surprise in the paddock. There are going to be ramifications. What should we be looking at across the rest of the driver market? Where are the places we should be looking next for what's going to happen as a result of this in the coming days and weeks?
Well, the first thing for me is that Ricciardo seems to have stolen a Renault seat from Esteban Ocon, because the indication we were getting in Hungary last weekend was that deal was either very close or maybe even done and just needed to be communicated. Mercedes wanted to put Ocon there to further his development ahead of putting them in his own works team. Renault wanted him because he's considered an upgrade on Carlos Sainz Jr., French driver, so that's really appealing. It looked done. And now, obviously, he's swept in, so Ocon needs to find somewhere to go. Sainz needs to find somewhere to go. Will he get back into the Red Bull fold? And the other thing for me that I find really interesting is Mercedes thought they had a place for Ocon. So then their big priority is, right, what do we do with George Russell, Formula 2 Championship leader, Merck Jr.? Now, it's not as simple as just trying to carve a place open for him. They've lost the place where they thought they were getting Ocon, so they've got to try and find homes for two drivers. It's hard enough finding room for one, so that'll be really interesting to see how that plays out.
It's going to be fascinating as well to see which way Red Bull goes in terms of replacing Ricciardo. They weren't expecting to have to do this. Now, our understanding is that they were leaning towards Pierre Gasly, were a vacancy to come up, but it's easy to say that.
Gasly over Sainz.
Exactly, Gasly over Sainz. Sainz is still under contract but on loan, so Renault, they've still got a little bit of time to be able to reactivate that and bring him back should they want to. Now, Sainz has got the experience, but Gasly has had a good season, good strong run in the Hungarian Grand Prix, plus great results at Monaco and Bahrain, underpinned with some other good, solid, slightly less obvious headline performances in the lower order. But it seems that they were favouring Gasly. There have been problems between Verstappen and Sainz before. Sainz had to work quite hard to engineer his way out of Red Bull temporarily. That maybe has left a little bit of a bad taste in the mouth at Red Bull. And I think they see Gasly as a guy who is the future. Plus, he has experience of the Honda engine. So that'll be very interesting to see what they do. I suspect if they're going to take Gasly, obviously he's under contract, they can do that quite quickly. Remember, when Sebastian Vettel signed his Ferrari deal for 2015, they very, very quickly confirmed Daniel Kvyat. Now, that may not have worked out, but it shows if they've got drivers in their stable who they're going to replace within the A-team, they do it pretty quickly.
Scott, is there any potential, I'm going to put you both on the spot here as we wrap this up. If you're Christian Horner and that news lands on your desk, like you've lost Daniel Ricciardo, what would you do? Not what do you think they're going to do, because as Ed explains, Red Bull tend to be pretty good at having what you've called before the next cab off the rank ready to go. But are there any left field options we could consider here? Do you think, what could I do with 2 years worth of Fernando Alonso or something like that? Although I can't imagine him driving a Honda-powered Formula 1 car again. But anything left field, or do you think they'll promote from within?
I think the first thing I'd have to do is find the top of my head, because I'd have blown my lid absolutely. So you have to try and pick that back up. And then I just think you would look at Alonso, and you'd have to consider sort of what your short-term game would be. Red Bull's won big by backing homegrown talent. I think they've been really impressed by Gasly, and I don't think they'd really hesitate. They'd look at whether it's Gasly or Sainz and then make it's a boring answer, but I think they would just go sensible and look from within.
And we do know they've had opportunities to go after Alonso before. There have been opportunities to bring him in when he's been looking to move, but they've not wanted to. They know he's a very political operator. They believe he brings problems with him, and they've already got a driver in Max Verstappen who's not afraid to cause some problems if he doesn't like what's going on. If you're Red Bull, you're thinking, well, if you don't like kind of a Ricciardo-Alonso partnership or a Alonso-Vettel partnership, Verstappen-Alonso would be even more mind-blowingly difficult. They recognise how good Alonso is, and I think maybe if they didn't have Verstappen, it might be a different thing. If they were thinking, we haven't got a top liner left, they'd go after him. But while they've got Verstappen, there's no way they'll go near him unless there's a complete about-face in terms of their thinking and their mentality.
So Gasly?
I think it has to be Gasly. Sainz would do a great job. I do rate Sainz. He's an intelligent driver, a hard-working driver, got some really, really good results. But I think the history leans them towards Gasly. Plus, the day in, day out experience of the Honda engine. Yes, great exchange of information between Red Bull and Toro Rosso over this year, but having a driver who's lived and breathed that for a whole season will probably give them a little extra bonus from the seat unexpectedly emerging, and it might save them a few little blind alleys and just bring that extra experience into the debriefs that they don't have otherwise. So that's maybe an upside for them. I think that's how they'll look at it.